I guess here we go. We know how it is. It's like we're just going to move, we're not going to move. Labor and unemployment. Now, what we're looking at is the labor market. Now, we're looking at, again, we're going from the macro perspective. And a lot of times, remember the point I made, I want unemployment going down. And I want labor, I want number of jobs and stuff like that going up. And we all do, in other words, wages going up. I want people to live better. That's why I mentioned before, I hate it when other people say, oh, we should live with us, because they never mean themselves. 0.0001% does, but not the powerful. And then they'll tell fantasies about how things work. And this is very difficult. Reality does not care about feelings, or ideology, whatever. Reality tends to wham you when you get stupid. And so we're looking at how labor and unemployment. Now, labor, the labor market, and we dealt with those who had micro already. We dealt with this before, but I mentioned the labor market is composed of two things. Now, the labor market, the demand for labor is built, and okay, my face is cutting away, but you can only see the PowerPoints yourself, is built on productivity, what you generate for firms. So it's the more productivity you have, choose this line. And if you have more productivity, the demand for labor goes out here, because why? These workers produce more. If they produce more, then we'd have an equilibrium. And I apologize for my squiggly line. My equilibrium would be here. This is why a lot of economists will demand productivity increase, because the demand for labor is based on the firm's need to use labor. So you have productivity increase. When you increase in productivity and capacity, demand shifts outward. Demand shifts outward, wages go up, and number of jobs go up, which means you have a win-win. So we love when demand for labor shifts outward. When demand is shifting inward, when you have policies or actions, for example, in Germany today, and this is a macro topic, and is the fact of they have, and California's actually an example state has done this, but I'm picking on Germany here. They have engaged in policies that have caused the cost of producing, making goods to increase. So their labor demand has done this. And so now their equilibrium is lower wages and fewer jobs. Now, as some other industries have been hammered, you have German firms who've been in Germany for 100 years, big, large German, that are leaving Germany and going to other European countries, usually Eastern European countries, with low power cost, or even to the United States or China, which also have lower power costs, because European governmental policies double, triple, quadruple, increase the cost of power 5-fold. And all the blithely saying of, oh, it's free, it's cheap, it's this, does not change values. Costs exist. Ignoring of cost leads to failure. Remember, I talked way back when the Soviet, and I'll mention again later, the Soviet Union maintained semi-equivalence to the United States by lavishly using resources. In other words, a Soviet Alpha attack submarine, which they had to make out of pure titanium, which is a fantastic metal, I mean, way better than steel. To be equivalent to our Los Angeles class submarines, they made the Alpha class attack submarine out of pure titanium. Now, the Soviets would make up some lie of how it's so much cheaper making the submarine the way it is. Like, no. Just the titanium used in the making of the Alpha class submarine costs more than the making for the United States of a nuclear aircraft carrier. Just give you an idea of the waste of resource. And that gives you an example of government waste, government misdirection, the inability. So, wishing something does not make a reality. Demand for labor is based on productivity. What do they generate? How they produce for firms. The supply of labor is based on the willingness of us to work. In other words, if they're paying more wages, more people willing to work. That's it. If they're paying lower wages, fewer people willing to work, because it's like, why work for this low wages? Now, there's not one unified labor market. We can make the mistake unintentionally of saying there's one giant unified labor market. There's one big labor market that represents all production, all output, everything in the country. This is not true. This is not true at all. In fact, that is a failure. The labor market is broken into hundreds, thousands of sub-labor markets. Everybody cannot do every job. I've used Ben Costner a number of times because, his story is fantastic. fantastic. I mean, so many things are there. In fact, we can go through trades to labor market, and you can hit him in every good trait there. You can look and say his mother, who had, liabilities, inculcated those traits. That's why, when people say, "Oh, well, someone has this kid," that's like, no, 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 no. People can do that because she had nothing. So everybody can do it. Ben Carson was the youngest neurosurgeon in the United States history, a brain surgeon. Oh, brain and spinal columns and stuff like that. It's like IQ, like 160 or something like that. A good, calm, mellow, sharp human being. So on the macro level, we talk about labor. But we have to remember, not everybody can do every job. Not everybody's qualified to do every job. So the market's divided into, I can't have a blocking function and make lots of little blocks into hundreds, thousands of little sub-labor markets. A bunch of little chunky little labor markets. It's divided into them. Some of them overlap, some don't. And so on the macro level, we talk about having more labor, having more jobs. On the micro level, what's happening to those little blocks? Because, everybody's not in the same block. Again, people are more complex than capital, resources, and land. See, these you always have people saying, "Oh, we need this labor." You always have to do minimum wage during the cycle. We need more labor because the firms need labor. Otherwise, nothing will get done. Or in Britain now, someone said, if we do not have the cheap foreigners, who will drive me around as my chauffeur? Oh, you know what you'd have to do? Pay somebody. I'm sorry, this is the United States. Britain. You'd have to pay somebody to drive you around good money. If you want someone to be a maid, you have to pay them real well. But see, people are more complex than capital, resource, and land. See, capital gets cheaper. The machine does not care. My pen, if pens get cheaper, my pen does not go, "Oh, I'm suffering, I'm a pen." No, it's a pen. If resources get cheaper, I'll tell you right now, price of gasoline drops down to 80 cents a gallon. I'm doing, ooh, 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 ooh. Everybody's doing, ooh, 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 ooh. Life's going great. We're going, you know what I mean? We're doing wave and all that kind of fun stuff. The gas doesn't care. The oil does not care. The oil does not go in the corner and say, "I can't make a living." Land, if land gets cheap, that's why, people always like, if land cannot get cheap, land cannot get cheap. It's like, no. If land got cheap, the only people who would be hurt is the speculators. In fact, one of the reasons housing prices, besides other government regulations, which there are many, keep going up is the Fed is saying, well, if the housing prices went down, there would be the end of the universe because these banks are getting in trouble. We've got to save them. It's like, no, let them die. In fact, those who have me micro know, when Silicon Valley Bank, if the Fed had let Silicon Valley Bank go bankrupt, the United States government wouldn't have to do $100 billion bailout to bail all these multimillionaires and billionaires who were stupid. It would have been a few $1,000,000. That's it. Because it's all we are obligated by law to pay. In fact, the laws passed under the no longer too big to fail act said, directly, what they told us they said was the fact of, we'll let them fail. But we didn't. But they were going, let's go to later. So, but those things, you see, land doesn't care if it loses value. People, though, when people get paid less, we care about it. But productivity determines wages. So our productivity, how much we produce, determines wage. The more you can produce, the more you get paid. And productivity is part of the demand for labor because demand for labor is based on what do the workers do for the firm. But then there's a funny thing. Things that shift since productivity is part of the demand for labor because first of all, humans, workers are reasonably intelligent. That means we say when we supply labor, we make the decision to supply labor, we're going to go around and look and examine productivity too, because why? We're looking at making labor available, but if there's higher productivity, in other words, it pays more, we're going to supply more of that labor because why? It's paying more. And so this interest is the fact of a lot of things that shift demand for labor also shift the supply of labor. And the people who want labor, who want to hire labor, think about the supply of labor because they look at that equilibrium point. Where's the equilibrium wage and stuff like that. Now, the labor market is divided in hundreds, thousands of sub-labor markets, and these traits affect demand and supply of labor. And these traits have crossover. They overlap with each other. They tie into each other. So, for example, let's take these first big traits: skills, experience, and education. These things tend to overlap. They tend to overhang with each other. Don't mind me. I'm in a very, walking mood. They tend to overhang or overlap with each other. They tend to tie in with each other. And so we call these the big three because they determine. I know, I got my wild hair. I haven't got a haircut yet. They determine productivity. Now, skills, experience, and education, we're going to define all of them, have overlap. That's why I have that crazy Venn diagram with the overlap. And remember, the demand for labor comes from productivity. What do I generate? Productivity is determined by those three items. But the thing is, that determines the demand for this. Demand for labor comes to the firms, not us. We're supplying labor. But we look at these things, not all of us, because we deal with that in the lesser traits. We look and say, what skills, what experience, what education, I think I was going to wipe out his good, yeah. What skills, experience, what education will increase my productivity. Basically, I'm saying productivity, basically, will increase my wage so I get paid more. Which ones will do that? See, a lot of people go into the business areas, the engineering areas, stuff like that. Some really love it. Other times people just going in and saying, I want what? I want to get a job. I want to get a job that pays well. A rational decision. Nothing wrong with that. Okay, labor will suffer from a lot of bad normative. Bad normative is I'm defying reality. I follow a lot of that because people do not often like the results being based on productivity. A lot of people hate that. It should be based on productivity. It's based on what I want. Macro government ideologies will often, not macro itself, the government side of macro and ideologies will often decry reality. They don't like it. Those people get college degrees and Build-A-Bear, and they're saying, I should be earning 120K a year. Are you a Nepo baby? No. Do your parents run a large firm? No. Did you get a degree and feel good? Yes. Guess what? Say hello to 20K a year. You got a degree in mathematics. You're good at it. Say hello to getting paid good money and has you pass other, qualified getting even more money. And so we're going to see a lot of that. But right now we're dealing with the big three. We're going to deal with the last three too. Okay, so this sums up the problem. We run into a lot of the wind will demand that reality bend. And I mean, I like the old Mulan. It's cool. Reality, it cannot, and it's in thinking this way will cause tremendous damage because people want it should be this way. I mentioned before, and I'll mention this again. In terms of, I always remember an old movie from the late 40s of a school teacher, a music teacher in high school, complaining about not wanting to make music jingles for the radio. We talk about this before. This one just sticks with me. And it's like he's decrying it, and he decries the people in the radio stations who, I said, keep in mind back then when you were a radio station, people would come to you and say, I sell something, you would have to make the jingles. And you didn't want to do it. I want to do stylish, cool music. I don't have to do this kind of garbage music. Yeah, there may be garbage music, but that's hard. And the whole joke was these two frumpy, middle-aged people, they're not as cool and suave as a school teacher and his wife and his friends and stuff like that. It's too early for squares, but it gets that term soon. But they weren't cool like that. It's like, what were they doing? They were saying, what does my customer need? My customer's trying to make sure people know about their automobiles, their candy bars, whatever they're trying to sell. And the person thought that beneath him. What is he saying? What is he saying is beneath him? Servicing, taking care, meeting the needs of my fellow humans. That was beneath him. Oh, he wants to do it his way. When he wants to do it his way, what he likes to do, but not bear responsibility for that. He's saying they should be inferior to me. They should do what I want to do because to recognize I am a superior being. They should know their spot down here is garbage, and that I am a ruling class. And that's temptation we all have. Okay, skills. Now, these are advantages or disadvantages that people, well, the first one is 8 skills. These are things you are born with. These are things your genetic code. That's Ryan Leaf. I was this poor guy, I pick on him. He can throw a football nearly a football nearly a whole football length. And a lot of people complain about glasses, progressive myopia. So innate skills are advantages or disadvantages you are born with. These are burnt into your gene code. And they create a starting point. Just like, hey, having parents, which we'll discuss, in week 7, creates a starting point. That's your starting point as such. I am not being cruel. What you do with it. Now, a lot of people complain about saying, well, it's not fair. It's unfair. A lot of envy coming because it's unfair. They were born with better genes. They have better eyesight. They have a better memory. You'll see a lot of complaint in macro about unfair genetic advantages, unfair advantages. They were just given to you. And that's envy. Because there's no way. Keep in mind, if someone's starting up here, another person starting, I wonder if I can use white. Probably not. No, outlining white just never works. Come on, it doesn't want to do the black X. There we go. And someone's starting out there. I cannot raise this big X down here. I cannot raise this X to that X. The only way I can make them equal is for this X to be pulled down to that X. In other words, that becomes the way people compete. They go to the government and say, that person has unfair advantage, break their knees. But I built nothing. Remember the gene joke? I created nothing. But there'll be a lot of, because of these skills, people get a lot of, upset because someone has genetic advantage. And as we would say, suck it up, buttercup. But the reason I have Leaf there, Leaf was a bomb. He was one of the biggest busts of NFL history. Not the biggest, probably in the top 10. He was lazy, didn't like working. He couldn't be taught. He didn't like, he thought he knew everything. He became more mellow and, tried to get his life together later, but that's genetic skills. Now, other skills are quiet. I have Julian Edelman here. Oh, you gotta love any guy who's like my height. I am a short dude. And he played, as a wide receiver, he played professional football. Okay. He's 5 foot nothing. He's 100 nothing. He played a decade in pro football. Tell me that ain't awesome. Okay. He acquired a skill. He worked. He improved. He got better. How do you run routes? How do you shift? He played any position they wanted him to play. These are things you gain along the way. A lot of you have acquired skills you even know about. Most of you know how to play, use computers and reprogram and cell phones and make images and videos and stuff like that. I admit, I acquired a skill. Learn how to do this because we're changing our system. I am old and slow and cantankerous. Okay. How do I do this? Economics I know a lot about. This is what? This is an acquired skill. If I ever, God willing, I won't because I love teaching in North Greenville. If I ever moved on, it'd be like I'd be able to say, I understand how Canvas works. I understand, more nuances with the use of PowerPoints. I understand how the system Blackboard works. Those are acquired skills. A simple acquired skill would be, hey, if you're doing, I have this one here, but I just another one. You're doing landscaping. Through high school and college, you did landscaping. It was all a Spanish crew. I apologize. It's gonna be one of those days. It was always a Spanish speaking. So you may learn what? I learned Spanish. What I learned Spanish. Well, it's not Castilian Spanish. I'm learning the crew was a bunch of people from Panama, so I'm learning Panamanian accented Spanish. Can't read or anything like that, but that's an acquired skill. That's cool. In fact, it's always a tough thing. Making sure people, companies know your acquired skills is always difficult because you don't want to lie about them, but you don't want them. You want them to know you can do these things, and that's always the toughest thing to get across. Specialize. These are skills only good in one narrow industry. Steelworking is only good in steelworking. Now, mining is good cross-sectionally because a lot of things mine, but it's only good in the mining industry. And there's a few labor markets overlap to the mining industry, and so your skills will be good there. If the mining industry goes away, which is happening in a lot of countries, then your job's eliminated. Here's an example for specialized skills and leading to a problem of unemployment. When the Japanese went all green and they got rid of all the coal plants, Honshu, Hokkaido. I believe it's Hokkaido. Because Hokkaido's Northern Island, Japan. I apologize. I always look these up. But I believe it's Hokkaido is the. That's just saying Mina. There we go. Yep, Hokkaido. Hokkaido's in Northern Island. That's where all the coal deposits tend to be. So Hokkaido used to have large areas of coal mining. What was once the main city of Hokkaido was a city called Yubari. In fact, I watched a documentary on it a few weeks ago. No, actually almost a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. It was a sad thing. Yubari declined from being a city of 150,000 to 5,000, which from being a city, a small city, to being a tiny town. So you've got you see it looks sad. Because why? Especially industry that people did a lot of mining. The mining industry took a hit. All the people lost their jobs. The city collapsed and decayed. In fact, I think when I was watching the documentary, thinking, where I hear the term Yubari before, there was a Japanese light cruiser in the Second World War that had been a number of major events that was called the Yubari. And so specialized skills only good in one industry. Why do people do that? People engage in specialized skills because for a certain level of work, I can get more pay. In other words, when I do specialized skills, one sticks out more. For a few months of training, I can earn that. And instead of spending several years getting to do something like that, I can achieve a rather good pay for years of training, but they're only good in one industry. Now, keep in mind that specialized skills. Plumbing, for example, is not, it only works in certain industries, but every industry uses plumbers. Because every industry uses plumbers, that's not a specialized skill. Experience. Now, experience and skills are overlap. They do overlap. They are related. But I always point back to the sense of experience is getting used to things, learning how to show up to work, keeping the nose to grindstone, getting something done, suffering fools gladly. These are the waitresses there. And this is from Terminator, the classic Terminator. I don't count any Terminator made in the 21st century because bad movie. You ruined my enjoyable franchise. May you rot and suffer for doing that. That's Terminator Dark Fate. There should be like a punishment, a criminal punishment for ruining, parts of when I was young. That's just criminal. But what does waitressing do? Person who waitresses, he or she, waiter for man, learns patience. They learn how to suffer fools gladly. Now, I may be hiring this young woman for a job that's nothing to do with it. She finished a degree. She's an accountant. And what does it matter? She do? One, she knows how to show up to work every day. Boom, 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 boom. She knows how to suffer fools gladly without taking a hammer and going whack, 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 whack. She keeps a schedule. That's experience. That's experience. Knowing how Britain used to do this because of experience. Britain used to always hire for police. I mentioned this before, I mentioned again. Their police, their bobbies, used to always be made up of ex-military personnel. Because ex-military personnel have a higher tolerance for stress. And think about it. It's 1946. I was fighting Jerry from 1939 to 1945, and now I'm being a Bobby, and I have to deal with drunks and stuff like that occasionally. And they come in and go, "What stresses you?" What stresses me is when Jerry is throwing grenades into my foxhole, and he's trying to blow me up. That's what stresses me out. What about a person throws a punch here? That's supposed to stress me? That's kind of nothing. I mean, they're not trying to kill me, so I'm not talking anything about someone throwing a punch at me. And so they could take stress. For example, the United States, we've eased this up a few years ago. I mean, this led to a nearly catastrophic number of accidents. We had a number of them. They said we don't want. They actually said this. We don't want white men to be applying air traffic controllers to be air controllers, and we don't want ex-military because too many air traffic controllers are white men and ex-military. They wanted other people. I don't care if my air traffic controller has tentacles, as long as my little dots that are called planes don't run into each other and they have no accidents. Yay! Well, what they did is why would a lot of ex-military people be great air traffic controllers, especially combat vets? Stress level. Air traffic controller gets a lot of people with stress. If I had been in combat all that time, what is this? You know what I'm saying? Air traffic. Oh, that's not stressing me out. Experience. Education. Now, education is the name says. I'm learning from the experience and skills of all the generations who came before us. The sum knowledge of human history that's allowing us to skip thousands of steps. We don't need to invent math. Math was invented. In fact, our math system, all the way up to when I was a kid, until when I got in my young 20s, was always called Arabic numerals. Because who we get it from? The Arabs. I know. The Arabs get the zero from the Indians, but my ancestors didn't know that. Your ancestors didn't know that. So we called them Arabic numerals. Now, if we're going to say, okay, we're going to call them Indian, I wouldn't mind if they called them Indian numerals. For some reason, they got rid of calling it. I'm not being cruel, but that's what we skip difficulties. We are gaining the skills and experience already come before us. So, for example, here's an example of learning. If you ever shoot, you shoot at an outline. That's an ugly outline of a human being, but you shoot that. You may put a bullseye in, like you sight on a bullseye that may or may not have an outline. When you shoot an outline. Because why? It was discovered with experience that, going back to our Civil War, that, keep in mind, in our Civil War, we were a very religious country. Not hypocritical, it's very faith-based people, North and South. And a number of, young men, Northerners and Southerners, could not, in good conscience, shoot another human being. They couldn't do it. But they're in a military unit. They're not going to leave their friends. They'll stand there and die, but they'd actually be shooting over other people's heads because they couldn't what? Can't shoot a human being. You can hit a fly at 500 yards and you can't shoot somebody? Well, yeah, it's a fly. I kill those all the time. So now, when you do training, you shoot at outlines. I say now. We've been doing that for, like I said, the Civil War, going back 160, we learned it then and said, aha. So we got the First World War, we did that kind of training. We shot at outlines. Because in combat, most you're going to see probably quickly is an outline. You get used to shooting an outline. That's an example of education. A brutal example, but we're going to go with it. Ivory Towerism. Ivory Towerism, professor, teacher, anybody, in Pioneer Education, students teach them things that are wrong. In other words, we teach them things that are not right. There's a lot of bad normative out there. I mentioned before, again, we get to education, come back to it. Communism is taught in U.S. school systems, has a problem. It doesn't work. Why are we teaching the system as this is what you should do when it does not work? Well, teachers like it. I don't care if they like it. That's ivory Taoism. I'm believing things that are not real. Heck, the whole fight over having men and women's sports, I would never agree with it because I believe it's unfair. Well, it's the same thing. No, it's not. One of the reasons we created women's sports decades ago was the fact of and allowed women to play in sports separate from men is because they are different. That's it. To say that some guy who's claiming to be a woman now is a woman is fantasy land. You might as well just say there's just sports and let women and men play in them. And so these are things, that are not real, but then people act on them. They try to live them and they fail. And this is very difficult because the people who fail, they trust something real, they go out and act upon it, they fail. They don't blame the people who taught them something that wasn't real. They blame the rest of society, particularly been taught communism. The reason you don't have anything is because you're being oppressed by the system. The man has you down. Now, has that happened? Yeah. The problem is the fact of, no, but you didn't gain any real skills. You have nothing that no one finds. It's your productivity. Boom. Oops. Your productivity is there. You think you should be getting paid somewhere over here, but down here, that's where the demand for your skills are. You generate no output. So you're saying I'm not getting a job I want. I'm being paid. I mean, heck, I'll tell you right now. I want to be CEO of Disney. They should fire that guy or whatever the new guy is because he's an idiot. They could make me CEO. In fact, I can save Disney a good tens of millions of dollars right off the bat. They can hire me and pay me 1/10 of his salary. Boom! You're probably saving like $40 million a year. In fact, that's good. Just out of curiosity. Yeah. Because instead of paying me $45 million a year, boom! You can pay me a measly $4.5 million. I am saving you $40 million. I am so generous. So right off, Disney's winning. Then I go, but I'm not in that job market. Was that job is man could way up there, high productivity. Hopefully, I'm not there. Okay, now next to the lesser three traits. These traits, in some cases, have a bigger impact than the primary three traits. They have more of an impact, more of a whamming on it than the primary three. Even though, see, the first three determine productivity. We as workers consider them because they determine our productivity, whether or not we get paid. The lesser three are the mentalities of the worker. How does their utility combine into it? Excuse me. We get a lot of, a number of times we get bad normative here, ivory Taoism, because people don't like that. People in academics, political activism, they'll ignore the impact of the lesser three because they don't like the results. Yet the drive of the lesser three matter because it results in differences in pay by different markets a lot of times. Risk. This one's easy to understand. You're doing a job that does what? I get a higher rate of cancer. Because I get a high rate of cancer, I'm getting 50% more money. Now, you I may say it's not worth it, something like that. But a lot of people say, well, yeah, but I'm getting more money here. Why not? And so what happens? People get paid more money. Why? They're taking a risk. Other people say, well, that's not fair. They're doing the same job I'm doing. No, they're not. They might glow at night from radiation. You don't. No, the job's just as difficult. My job's just as difficult as theirs. And maybe that's just difficult. But they're doing a job that has physical risk. So I'm what? You are compensated for your physical risk. A lot of people getting bad outcome because they don't like that. Just like they ignore financial risk and other kind of risk because they don't like risk. Intellectuals are notoriously massively risk averse, but they have an inflated opinion of themselves. personally believe they should be getting paid more, generating more, because they are awesome. Job type. What do I like doing? And this goes back to personal utility. Accountants get paid well. Why people say, this other degree? I always pick up Build-A-Bear because it's an easy one and we don't have one. This other degree is just as difficult and strenuous as accounting. No, it's not. Environmental activism is as important as environmental engineering. No. And now I'm not saying it because of my opinion. I'm saying that because if I'm a firm, my demand for environmental engineers is there. The other people who want to be environmental engineers is here. So it pays a very high income. Whereas when we go to the other ones, environmental activists, their productivity is like down here. And so what they get paid is down there. Oh, I should be doing the same. Well, do you know how to design and set up a waste treatment plant that does not dump toxins in the environment? No, it just shouldn't be done. You're useless. I'm not being cruel. The poor person there with the hair, she's become a meme. Complains about there being no jobs, no good jobs. It's like, economy's paying great. Management pays well. If you get a degree in logistics, companies glomming all over saying, oh, blah, 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 unless they find out you can't add, then you're in trouble. Location. This is one where, heck, I'll start with this one. This is funny. What are the traits of location? What's location like? Is it warm, sunny? Is it hot and humid? Is it frosty? All sorts of different things about location. And so, a good example of locational traits determine wage. For example, the cost of living in Alaska and Hawaii are almost the same because both have to import the majority of their food. Hawaii is one of the lowest paid states in the United States. Alaska is the highest paying state in the United States. Why? Because Alaska's got miserable location. Hawaii's a beautiful location. A lot of people say, yes, my rent will eat up over 2/3 of my salary and I'm getting paid nothing, but I'm in Hawaii. Okay, how do I live that person to Alaska? Throw a lot more money at them. Now, this led to a phenomenon called Frostbelt and Sunbelt, which goes back to the 60s. I apologize. Which goes back to the 60s. Which a lot of people are saying the Frostbelt would be in the North, New England, stuff like that, Michigan, Ohio, stuff like that. They were all dying because they were cold. Everybody freezing. Everybody's moving to the Sunbelt where it was warm. So if I'm Michigan and Minnesota and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania and New York and Massachusetts, the reason my state's declining is not my fault. The weather cursed us. As a young person, I fell for that. I know, because those places are nice and good to live and stuff like that. It's like, well, wait a minute here. If you stop and think about it, how come Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana have grown like, Michigan and Minnesota and New York, and they declined a little bit. They don't grow that well. Why does that happen? They're in the Sun Belt. You can't get more sunnier than there. Oh, that's right. They had bad policies. They still do. In other words, but the politicians, instead of people looking and saying, what are you doing to fail? In other words, what did Massachusetts do to make itself a failure state? What did California do to make itself a failure state? They don't look at that. They say, the weather killed me. Well, California can't say weather, though. They say Texas is just sabotaging them. They actually said they should give it to Texas because it's hurting California. It's like California's hurting itself. Texas nothing to do with it. Okay, unemployment. I'm not going to be going through this part of unemployment, and then I'll go through, I'm going to finish this section of unemployment, then I'm going to record, and it'll be attached to this large item. Okay. Now, unemployment, we go, what is the definition of unemployment? Now, it's a simple definition. You don't have a job, you're looking for a job, and you're willing to work. Now that's a very stripped down, easy definition, and economists will say it is not an accurate definition, but it is a simpler definition to measure. You show up. Do you have a job? Nope. Are you looking for a job? Yep. Are you willing to work? Yep. You're unemployed. Now, granted, a few other things have to be there. You have to be like over 16 and under 65. Once you pass 65, you are not counted as unemployed because you're considered retired, even though you may still be working. If you're working, they count you as employed. If you lose your job, they don't even count you. But that's a minor problem, ultimately speaking. So we go with because it's a simple definition. It's easy for the simple-minded government officials to say, okay, who's unemployed? We exclude people over 65 unless they're working. 217 again, unless they're working. College students are also not counted because they're considered college students to their fully. Unemployment does serve a purpose. It punishes the lazy and the indulgent. That's beautiful. Punishing the lazy and indulgent, I can go for that. Every person who loses their job is not lazy or indulgent. You can do everything right, still you lose your job because why? The general economy, things went wrong, and you've done nothing wrong. You work hard, stuff like that. You're Disney right now. The new CEO, Tedesco, whatever his name is, he's having. I was saying his name wrong. Oh, Damaro, right? I thought it was Tedesco. My bad. He is saying everything's going fine at Disney. It's like, dude, you've eliminated over 15% of the jobs at Disney. If Disney's doing so fine, why are you firing workers? We're getting more efficient. But you said everything you're doing was perfect. Everything you're doing is perfect. You don't need to fire anybody. I'm not being cruel. So some people can do anything well and still get fired. If you lose your job, it doesn't mean there's anything bad about you. There are people who lose their jobs who need to, but the way the book and stuff recorded made it sound like if you lost your job, it was your fault. No. Sometimes you can do anything right and still lose your job because the company's just facing damages. Okay, now the labor force, those between the ages of 17 and 65, the labor force participation rate is that percent of the labor force that is working or wants to work. Now, there are types of unemployment. Unemployed person, you don't have a job, you're looking for a job, you want to work. There's structural unemployment. These things go with specialized skills. These are skills only good in one industry. These are skills only good in one industry, and so you use them in that one industry. If this industry takes a hit, boom, those skills are useless. Now, structural employment, a lot of economists say, it doesn't really exist. They talk about when I was young. I still say it exists because of the hit. If you lose your job, you just go get a new job in the same year doing the same thing, you might take, if you're unlucky, a 10% wage hit. Imagine having a job and skills, and all of a sudden you lose that, and to get a new job, you have to take a 70% cut because the skills you had are no longer useful. They say, I just get used to it. It's like, yeah, that's a 70% cut. That can break a human being. That could be damaging to a human being. So I'm very cautious with this. I feel bad for the structurally unemployed. There are a lot of people would say, you have too much sympathy for them. Yeah, you're not a policymaker. There is cyclical unemployment. Now, we dealt with the business cycle. This is unemployment follows the business cycle. When we were booming, unemployment goes down. When we were busting, unemployment goes up. So the cyclical is the easiest one. Just get the economy moving, get things rolling, and everybody will get their jobs back again. That's cyclical unemployment. We just have to get the economy moving. Let's get the economy moving. Boom, we are there. There is seasonal unemployment. This one is minor in the United States. In some developing countries, it's very big. This is unemployment tied to the calendar. This is unemployment tied to the calendar. In other words, certain times of the year, let's go with agriculture, I may need more workers. And so you would have people who'd be employed for 6 to 8 months and then unemployed for 4 months. So in some agriculture intensive countries, wages can fall by 70, 80% off season. It's just stuff that's tied in. Farm is a great example. Christmas season is a great example. These are unemployment to unemployment tied to a calendar. When calendar changes, boom. The good thing is it follows a pattern. Because it follows a pattern, you can know what's going to be happening. Yeah, every time it gets November, unemployment goes down, but doesn't mean anything big because it's just what? Christmas unemployment. Or Christmas unemployment. And then there's frictional unemployment. Frictional unemployment is the amount of unemployment you have when you are fully employed. Now, this sounds really like an oxymoron. How do I have unemployment if I'm employed? Or if everybody's employed? What it means we hit frictional unemployment, right, is the number of jobs being created is basically equal to or greater than the numbers of workers you have looking for those jobs. So, for example, in the United States, frictional unemployment is said to be about 3.5%. We'll say 3 because he's now. Remember, in Japan, their frictional unemployment rate would be about 0.5, potentially 0.3. 0.3. So frictional is when you slide, you get slowed down, it generates heat and stuff like that. And so friction, that's people looking for a job. There's a job out there. You graduated, there's a job out there. You gotta find it. That may take time. A student we have now, his older sister, which is funny finding out she was his older sister because she was one of my students way back a decade ago. She was given a job offer in, I think it was Omaha. She didn't want to leave. They want to go to Omaha. That's frictional. In other words, she's what? There's bags of things like that. There's such things that make frictional very different. Now, the thing with frictional is the fact of different countries have different rates. The U.S. frictional unemployment rate, when we're fully employed, our unemployment will be 3 or 4%. In other words, unemployment will go up to about, be at 3 or 4%, and will be frictional employment. Everybody wants a job, can find a job. It's just a matter of looking and finding it. And I mean a job in their area. I don't mean, I'm a metal worker and I'm going off and doing sweeping floors. I mean a job in your area and stuff like that. So you have to look for it. In Japan, though, the frictional rate is 0.5. But that raises the question: why do the Americans and Japanese have different frictional unemployment rates? In other words, am I just being biased in favor of the United States? I'm an American being biased and saying, "Oh, it's the American. He's just being biased because he likes being American or being good with him, whatever." No, it seems like that. I'll admit that because it's easy to get the 3%. There's the 0.5%. So what makes the American frictional rates different? That's kilometers. That's 6 million to 3 million. So why are frictional rates different? One of the first ones is called economic structure. In Japan, most of your jobs, I should say, are provided by your mega hubs, your big firms. In the United States, most of your jobs are provided by your small and medium firms. So, for example, let's take a different one, just because I'm going to pick on the Fed eventually later, and recording the week too. Let's try to use the Fed just for an example, right? In the United States, we have about 5,000 banks, 5,000 different banks. You're looking for a job in banking. 50 of those companies may have jobs, but there are 5,000 banks automatically because I have to check out 5,000 banks. That's what? That's going to expand my search process. It won't take 3 days. It may take what? 10 weeks. That's going to raise your frictional rate. Because in the United States, most of our jobs are provided by small and medium firms, which means they can have most of the job growth. In Japan, most of the jobs are provided by mega corps. Large corporations usually, connect to, they tend to, so it's easy to search. If I'm used to be in Germany, Japan, check out the top 10 people, top 10 firms. You probably have a job by the time you put firm number 6. Just use for an example. And so the economic structure of the United States raises our friction rate, and the economic structure of Japan lowers their friction rate because it's easier for the Japanese to find if they have jobs. Cultural view of risk. This is often discounted. Remember, a lot of times bad ivory towers and people with ivory towers don't like risk. Risk shouldn't exist. What is your cultural view of taking risks? Now, keep in mind, it doesn't mean being stupid. And leaping like that, that's stupid. I know exactly what happened to me, because then I call it stupid. I can still call it stupid. I do what? Boink, 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 boink. Skunk. Horrible, horrible situation. Taking risks tends to, your willingness of society to take risks will tend to get you more pay. But then, other people don't like taking risks. They don't do as well. So what's your view of taking risks? The greater view you have of taking risks, to a certain degree, the higher unemployment may be, but the higher your pay is going to be. And so, a lot of cultures, a lot of people don't like taking risks. They don't like entrepreneurs, people who do take risks. What is your demographic makeup? There's your population. That is the birth dynamic of Japan. Look at it. This is by 15-year increments. Those in the 15 in Japan, oops, my bad. Only make 12% of the population. So in other words, if I'm Japan, I don't even need to make one new job. If everybody's just inheriting the job of a higher cohort, you need to make any new jobs. I need to make sure he's going to the jobs we have already. I'm gonna have no stress to make new jobs. And so, this is an example. This is a difficulty. So in Japan, you don't need to make any new jobs. Japan's had a declining population for over a decade. And it's built in. The Japanese are gonna have their population decline for the next, it would take at least 30 years for them to start turning their population problem. And a lot of people have that. A lot of countries have that problem. So the demographic situation. Geography. The United States is a lot bigger than Japan. We're a lot larger than Japan. We have more land area. So the point I made before. I hope I can miss that. I guess not. Oh, fudge. Well, we tend to be larger than Japan. It clicks forward. We tend to be larger than Japan. So that means, again, go back to the student I was mentioned before. She had a job offer in Omaha. Now, this from here to Omaha is greater than anywhere between any two places in Japan. The whole of Japan is the size of California. My family, we grew up in Massachusetts. You can tell by my accents. I live in South Carolina. I have a sister who lives in Pennsylvania. My other sister, before she passed away, lived in Nevada. Not being, cruel. It's just what it is. My brother, one of my brothers, lives in Florida. My other brother, he actually still lives in Massachusetts. But the funny thing is, with the exception of Pennsylvania, all those other distances are greater than the distance between the northern tip of Hokkaido and the southern tip of Kyushu. So the bigger your country is geographically, the larger your friction rate is going to be. You can find a job, but you may be getting it. Like if we're dealing with Russia, their friction rate would be another point or two higher because why? It's huge. You have people refusing job offers because they're getting something from Irkutsk or from Archangel or something like that, or Vladivostok. They're getting one from the edges of it all. You may choose not to. Okay, this raises the question. If the Japanese friction rate is 0.5 and the American friction rate is 3.5, the Europeans claim their friction rate is 7 to 8. Well, wait a minute. If we go and look at the previous conditions, Europeans, Japanese, United States, right? Jobs provided for. In the United States, they're provided by small, medium firms. In Europe, like in Japan, your large megacorps and your government. That should lower your frictional rate for them because, why? It's easy, their job search is easier. Their view of risk. What kind of risks do they have? They accept risk. Europeans don't like risk as much as Americans do. A bird in hand is worth two in a bush. They'll take a job they get, so they tend to avoid risk. That's going to tend to lower your frictional rate. They're geographically smaller than we are. That's going to lower your frictional rate. In other words, that's the whole EU slapped over the United States and a few other countries not in the EU. So they have that that view of risk. Their demographic situation, can't forget that one. Their birth rate is as low as Japan in many cases, but they allow immigration. So the demographic situation says the rate should be higher than Japan but lower than the United States. But they're saying the frictional rate, and they're saying this when I was young, they're saying the frictional rate is 7 or 8%, but that can't be true because they're measuring by different standards now. The reason the Europeans do that is because they don't want to look bad compared to the Americans or Japanese, so they claim that is their frictional rate. Now we go to counting problems of unemployment. These are things that unemployment not quite it should be. Why does unemployment not add up? Why does it not work the way it should work? How come we end up with errors, things that didn't go right? Why does the unemployment rate fail a number of times? In other words, how do we get it such that, don't mind me, Stefan, such that it's not working the way it should? Now again, unemployment, the rate does not only show your actual unemployment rate. In other words, you may have an unemployment rate and the official rate does not show it. It will be different. Now, none of these things are going to be causes. None of these things that cause economic problems of unemployment may be mistakes you're making on an economic or social level, your government level, societal things. So let's see what they are. Definition. The actual definition of unemployment is not right. We use the definition of a job. You're looking for a job, you want to work. It's a nice, easy definition. You call someone up, you have a job. Nope. You want to work. Yep. Are you looking for work? Yep. Okay. You're unemployed. Are you younger than 17? No. Older than 65? No. Boom. There you are. Because we do that to find out who is there, to get a lock on. I apologize. Our unemployment rate. So, we use that definition to get there. So, unemployment may seem lower than it is because people are looking for work. You know what I mean? We're not catching them all. In other words, a lot of people may not be, so this is an error. It could make unemployment rate higher or lower, but we do this because it's easier. You have a good economy. A lot of people may be holding out a little bit extra to get better income. That's definition. Discourage workers. These are workers who've lost their jobs and they keep getting rejected. A good example, yes, Great Depression. During that, there were fewer jobs in 39, 56 jobs than were in 33. The only thing that really grew during that time period was government jobs. And so a lot of people would be like, you've been unemployed since 34. You've been looking for a job, you get tired of looking for it. So while the unemployment in the United States dramatically declined from 33 to 39, that's because a lot of people are no longer being counted as unemployed. Because why? They get tired of getting rejected. They get tired of saying no. So just what? They just sit there and stay off. They're no longer being counted because they're discouraged. They're willing to work. They want to work. But they're tired of hearing no. It's like give up. Underemployment. These are part-time workers who desire full-time employment. The government counts them as employed even though they're not fully employed. So, for example, Mexico, about half the jobs in Mexico are part-time. But of those workers, about 89% want to work full-time. Part-time is half they get. Now, some workers do choose to work half-time. That's fine. Leave them there. Now, it used to be that in the United States, if you held three jobs, you were one person. One person, one job. That's it. They just add your part-time jobs in the United States. Back in the 90s, the United States wanted to have higher growth rates, higher GDP growth rates, low unemployment rates, stuff like that. Look like there's creating millions and millions of jobs. So the president, the government changed the definition. So this person was working here and working in two other places. The government counted them as three different people employed because it make it look like the job growth was greater. Whereas before, it's the same person, we just count them once. I don't think that's unethical. Yeah, well, and so you have part-time employment. The underground economy, black market economy, or shadow economy, whichever way you want to do it. I use all the terms interchangeably, especially black market and underground. Now, the shadow economy is a lot of times, again, there's major illegal, which is, again, murdering, killing, stuff like that. We don't like that. These are people, things forced in the ground by the weight of your taxes and regulations. Now, I'm old. I remember when Japan's shadow economy was not 86%. I remember when Japanese shadow economy, the underground economy, was 1% of GDP. So if you're Japan, oh, sorry, my kids left the TV on. I didn't even realize it because I was going on. All right, weird. Okay, so that indicates when your economy is being thrown like that, you're getting a large underground economy. That's showing the weight of taxes and regulations. I remember when Japan was, no, it's when back in the 80s, all those numbers were a lot smaller. The Japanese, the 1%, we weren't even the one with the United States. So we had the small shadow economy now of the major economy. We used to be in the middle. And we were even five, we were like 3%. The Germans, like the Japanese, they had a 2% underground economy. But the weight of your tax and regulations can throw things down. Because a lot of people go underground to avoid tax and regulation. The good point is people still have bad, jobs. The bad point is the governmental sector is so controlling and heavy that you're forcing things underground and could be hurting your economy long term. Number five is related to number four. The government's imposing costs on the economy. In other words, it's an overlap. The unemployment is being pushed up because the government is generating cost on the economy. And that is a brute. In 2009, during the Great Recession, the government closed down half the car dealerships. Now, car dealerships had nothing, the government had nothing to do with that. But the government wanted to reward spends, punish its enemies. And it was very political. Because if the car dealership found out you didn't donate money to the president, the person was president at that time, and stuff like that, the government said, you're not going to be a car dealership anymore, and they closed you. Even if you're making money. You could have been a lousy car dealership, but you donated to the government, that government kept you open. In fact, there was a funny thing. A person did a study and found, and this is inefficiency. The government closed car dealerships inversely proportional to their inefficiency and productivity. And if there's a car dealership more like making money, moving cars, doing well, having low inventory, the government was more likely to have your license pulled. That's a very bad thing. And this is a great example. I'm usually uninsured, but it's a great example of government imposed costs to the economy. In 1992, President Clinton was elected, saying, "I'm going to make sure we get, health gets a lot of things for uninsured, more benefits to people." 8 years of economic growth, the number of uninsured in the United States doubled. Which normally, after 8 years of economic growth, the number of your uninsured should do what? They should be shrinking. The government imposed costs on the economy. The government hammered and strangled the economy because what did the government do? The government said, I am going to mandate certain things in insurance packages. So, for example, the government had to make sure AIDS was being covered because people weren't paying for AIDS. No, insurance used to cover AIDS. It's just they didn't cover AIDS if you caught it by your actions. In other words, if you went in for surgery and got AIDS, you were there. If you caught it because you were sleeping around with 500 different people, the insurance companies didn't cover AIDS because why? That was preventable. Don't sleep around. Well, the president mandated no matter if someone has AIDS or not, you must cover them for insurance. When the vast majority of people, now AIDS is very expensive to treat. The vast majority of people get AIDS. 99% of it is self-inflicted. They put things where they don't belong, and they cause disease. In AIDS based, so that's over it up. The government mandated all insurance companies should have to pay for mental health. In other words, these became things that increased the cost of healthcare. Companies cut healthcare insurance coverage because you couldn't afford them. System abuse. This when people abuse the system. These people could have jobs and do well, but they're abusing the system of government programs so they can sit back and collect a check. They intentionally staying unemployed, disabled, or whatever, and collecting checks. They're causing disincentives. So, for example, the Danes recently revamped. In other words, the whole system of unemployment, welfare, and stuff like that. They revamped the entire thing. They had the same system since they created it in the 30s. But like many countries, they started importing their population had different values. That population had no problem staying on public assistance. In other words, it used to be old Danes would be like, the public assistance disability is meant for people who are disabled. I know I had a broken foot. I've had 3 weeks of healing up. I can get back to work and stuff like that. They go back to work, so they try to work again. My parents just do that. And this creeps through. In England, a decade ago, when they're looking at cuts to welfare, people had riots because people on welfare were getting paid so generously, they could afford vacations in like southern France and Spain. And riots saying, we have very stressful lives. We're unemployed. We need those vacations. Now, system abuse is a sign that the population is abusing the system. And remember, be amoral, be neither good nor evil. If I am amoral and I get money for doing nothing, a lot of money for not working, I'm going to what? I'm going to do that because that fulfills my low utility of getting more money. A great example of this is a Frenchman who put his mother in a fridge. Now, he did not kill his mother. It wasn't a Norman Bates situation. It was insane. Instead, the situation was this. What he was doing was Mummy took care of him. Mummy was a retired government worker, got a big government paycheck. And I mean like big, like, top, I think it was 1% of pension, which isn't good money. And, Sonny Boy used to spend it all. He lived with Mummy, stuff like that. But Mummy died. He might have to do the awful thing, work. So he basically, Mummy's checks came in. He never cleared Mummy dead. Mummy's checks came in. He collected money. He spent the money. He lived well. They know he was doing this at least when they discovered it. They know he was doing it at least 5 years because when they test checks, they found out for the previous 5 years, some other woman's been signing for the checks. Based on whatever the girlfriend of the month was. When Mummy died, he put in a very good deep freeze, so you couldn't tell how long she'd been dead. Yes, she was dead. And that's system abuse. Why do it? It worked for him. Was he burden the rest of society because she was a government pensioner? Yes, she was. He did not care. He viewed himself as owed. And this is system abuse. A lot of people engage in system abuse. Gaming it. We game numbers to look better. In the United States, for example, we lost jobs in 2009-16 and in 2021. But in both cases, the government didn't want to look bad. So what the government did was, in 2008, when the Great Recession started, that was our labor force participation rate. The government lowered it. My bad. To there. And it was by 2016, our labor force participation rate, they said, 62.5%. Now, let me explain something. From the late 70s until 2008, labor force participation rate had been around 67.2%. Sometimes 67.5, sometimes 67, stuff like that. But why'd they lower it? To make it look like there was job creation. Because those people that were moving from the labor force, they were unemployed, saying they were no good looking. They don't count. They weren't looking anymore. And so they reduced the rate to make it look there were more jobs created. Keep in mind, it doesn't look like much. When in 2000 they reduced the labor force rate from 62.8 to 61.4, that'd be like lowering unemployment by 2%. And then instead of having an unemployment rate of say, 5% officially, it'd actually be about 7%. That kind of damage. When they did this, when they moved that 5% difference there from 08 to when they did that, it's because heck, Trump would have won. Imagine Trump running for election first time in 2016, and the unemployment not officially being 5, but actually being 10%. Because these are people, there was no reason for the labor force participation rate to go down. Someone was like, no, the baby boomers are retiring. They're retiring. No, remember, when you retire, you're not counted as part of the labor force. You hit 65. You're leaving the labor force, both sides, the top and the bottom. You're not there. So see, people retiring aren't there. They're not in the labor force. They only count the labor force when they have a job. It was they add to the bottom and the top. That's the only time they come in. But they were saying that because had that happened, Trump would end up winning in 2016. So he would beat Hillary by about 5 points, maybe 6 or 7. Because why? The unemployment rate wouldn't have been then back to the 4% said it would have been close to 10. But then President Obama probably would have lost in 2012 when the unemployment rate would have been officially 8, but in reality it would have still been like 13. He didn't want that to happen, so he gamed it. Now, this is a distinction. I just thing here because when Reagan was president, early his presidency, he saw they lowered the labor force participation rate from like 67.2 to like 67.0. And he said, what is happening? Well, there are people not working, so we don't count them because they're not looking for jobs anymore. And Reagan said, these people are discouraged workers. They want jobs. They are looking for jobs. You will not lower the labor force participation rate. You may raise it when things are going, but you will not lower it. I won't have people say I'm playing with numbers to look better. But that's high utility. That's high utility. That's high morality. So we can know reality. Most government officials will say, yeah, lie to people so I can look good. A funny example, an open mic thing that happened in Britain a decade and a half ago was an average person was complaining to the then Prime Minister about impact of immigration. And after he's like, oh yes, it's all good. We're gonna deal with it. We're gonna make sure people are not getting hurt. We'll get rid of the crime and stuff like that. Don't worry about that. He got in his car with his staff, so that was driving off. The mic was still on. The mic in his suit was still on. He goes, boy, we got a bunch of stupid, bigoted people in this country. Everyone's gonna listen to that woman anyway. In other words, he totally discounted it because, why was he lying? Why did he admit the truth? Because people might vote for him. And so they fake numbers. They lie. That's the labor force participation rate we're just talking about there. Okay, minimum wage. Now, we mentioned this before, and I'm going to mention here. The minimum wage is the attempt of the government to try to improve the earning of the population. So what the government's going to say is, this usually affects the bottom end wages. Although California's trying to say, we have this problem here. Here's where we are. The equilibrium on the bottom, although again, in California, for many industries, California wants to raise the minimum wage to $30. The government should mandate it. We can say everybody should earn $30 an hour. I can decree it because I am the government. I will decree it. Again, government officials, thinking they can just bend their will over it. And minimum wage is like that. Well, I don't like the way it is. It's not good. We can make it better. And so the government says, I will mandate the minimum wage be here. This will be the pay everyone gets. If you go, oh yay, we'll have the same number of jobs, we'll all get paid more. Or even if somebody's go, and there'll be more jobs because we say this way it is. It's like, well, no. You only have as many jobs as people who hire you. And that's here. Which means what happens? The number of jobs go down because I increase the cost of hiring workers. I raised the government just mandated it would be called a price control. In this case, it's a wage control, but it's the same thing. I mandate it because this will make sure we get paid more. And so the government says it's going to impose minimum wage. Now, when you do that, in many areas, when it happens, when it's binding, you see the number of jobs go down. So unemployment, this is cost, unemployment goes up. Unemployment goes up, you usually have other attendance costs that rise with it. Now, why is the government engaged? Because it sounds cool. I will mandate it. I have decreed. See, a lot of times people, a lot of government officials are lawyers, and they're used to the idea of going to a court and having a judge say, I have decreed it. Well, it doesn't make it reality. You can't decree your way out of reality. I mean, if you're God, the big guy, and you can make whatever you want because you have infinite power, everything. When you're men, no, but a lot of them, they go to lawyers, they get degrees in public policy, they just think if I declare it, it's done. Oh, if I say men can give birth, men can give birth. You know? And so they defy economics. They, in reality, will not be mocked. Reality does not care. Reality goes, whack, you idiot. That's what reality does. It hammers you in the face when you do something stupid. This is like walking in front of a Mack truck and saying, the Mack truck will not touch me because I don't want to. I mean, if it swerves, so you're defying a pure positive. So when you impose minimum wage laws, when the government comes and says, boom, I'm imposing a minimum wage law, you get a lot of impact. You start causing damages. Now, right off when this is done, we already had the first one mentioned, you get the loss of low-end jobs. There are fewer jobs. You used to have this many jobs available for the bottom-end people. Now you have this many jobs. And so you have fewer jobs in the economy, causing you to have an economic tightness. But not just that. What happens over the long run is, remember, a lot of people, particularly for poor people in bad areas, they depend on these jobs to get better jobs. In other words, I depend on the jobs I have here to get skills and experience so I can get a better job later. But in order to leave the low-end labor market, I have to what? I have to gain skills and experience. So I can gain skills and experience having a job. There are fewer jobs available. I'm stuck in the low-end labor market longer. But not only am I stuck there, since I'm stuck there longer, there are fewer people leaving that because why? There are fewer people getting jobs and experience. But there are always more people who are coming in. In other words, the supply of labor starts shifting outward because normally it'd be what? This many people entering in 16, 18, entering labor force, stuff like that. And there are this many people leaving. Because all the people here in this initial situation, they're gaining skills or experience. But now they're not. Fewer of them. Before it was this whole swath. Now it's just to this point. They're the ones getting it. So half as many people again, skills, half as many people have jobs among the poorest part of our society. You get more higher unemployment rates. Like I said, the government wants to impose because they just mandate it. Sounds good. But when you also do this, going back to the prison, this leads right into, because I went lost skills experience. The first one is fewer jobs. Second one, people not getting skills and experience to move up. And a lot of times this is crippling for the poor because one of the ways you guys move up is get jobs, get skills, but not as many jobs. So you can't move up. Entitlement mentality creeps in. This one is a brute. People start getting the entitlement mentality. I am owed. This is what I should have just for breathing. It should be given to me. I should have it. It should be mandated. Excuse me. And that creeps in. That locks up people. That ties into their brain. They think, yes, I should have that. It should be mine. Yes, 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 yes. And they're entitled. I point a cousin of I think it was Antonio Brown Seals. Cousin of his said when he got a big contract, said, "Oh, you should give me more." He goes, "Why should I give you money?" He goes, "Because you got lucky. You just got that. You should give something to me." And if you don't, I'm gonna go like break your arm or something like that, and you won't be able to get the money anymore. That guy earnestly believed this football player should be giving him money just because he braved. He honestly believed that. He deserved it. And I said this is when I typed this one up, several years back. It was $15 now. I'm not saying they should have 30. We said, well, it's inflation, stuff like that. Well, inflation was created by the government. And the government's trying to create, this to, think they can just man things. So when you get entitlement mentality, though, people don't believe they have to work for their money. It can just be created for them. And so you eliminate certain positive cultural motivators because you're telling people they don't control it. The government can just mandate for them. And the government likes that because they say they can give it to people. and you damage a population. And the population thinks the government can just decree it. The government can just will I have a job. It's like, well, no, you have difficulty. Now, if the government really wanted to do something like this, or last one time, and crime rises. In other words, when the government engages in a lot of these things, they cause crime to go up. Crime increases. Crime increases. That hurts areas. We talk about food deserts and stuff like that, right? Food deserts happen when you have lots of high crime. It's a catch-22. You cause more cost, more impacts. You have higher cost tax regulations. You have these, again, high minimum wage laws saying they should be paid more because they should. They get entitled mentalities, but people don't have jobs. They don't have jobs. They engage in more crime. In other words, what you like is, this sounds awful, but most of your crimes are committed by young people, particularly young men between the ages of 15 and 35. What you want them working 8 hours a day, exhausted and beat. That way, when they're coming off work, they're like, oh, I'm so tired. They want to go and commit crime. Nope. Without jobs, they want to commit crimes. So I say, I can understand that, but see, you can't. That's what we say. Oh, that's why the minimum wage will be up, so they'll have jobs. It's like the minimum wage does not mandate they get a job. The government just says they will have a job because the government has decreed it. Because the government thinks that way. I can just decree it. It's like, no, you can't. I know you don't like it, but you can't. And so when you have things like crime increases, the number of jobs provided, the demand for people, hiring workers decreases because why? Crime's driving up cost. Grocery stores operate a 1% profit margin. When the government drives up costs, crime, minimum wage, those things start to disappear. They disappear, people lose their jobs. People lose their jobs, we're getting a vicious self-feeding cycle. When you have that, you have the lines that destroys God. Now, if the government wanted to improve things, this is why I admit, I'm for immigration restriction, particularly poor immigration restriction, because if I wanted to raise wages naturally and, by endemic economic means, I would cut off illegal immigration, I'd get rid of it, and I would restrict poor legal immigration, because poor legal immigrants, who do they compete with? Poor domestic populations. If you stop illegal and poor legal migration, then all of a sudden, when all these rich people want their maids and their servants, they're gonna have to be paying 2 or 3 times as much, because why? You can get them where they say, "Oh, Americans won't do their job." Oh, yes, they will, but you have to what? Pay them. 3 decades ago, there was a woman, who was going to be appointed Attorney General of the United States. She was earning almost $1 million a year as a high-end attorney. She had an illegal alien, a live-in, illegal alien, be a child care worker, and was paying her $13K a year. We say, wait a minute, you got this? Oh, my children deserve the best care they could get. For $13K, when you're earning $1 million a year, you can hire Bloody Mary Poppins. You might have to pay her $100K a year, but you could get Mary Poppins. No, she what? She liked cheap labor, so she could get her what? Her childcare worker cheap. That was it. So a lot of these firms want massive imported labor. So if you want to raise the minimum wage without these costs, these 4 costs, boom, do not allow, no one can come to the United States who's got no skills, no experience, no education. It's not going to let poor people come to the United States, because why? They're going to be competing with domestic population. When we talk about demand for goods, they're going to be increasing the population, demanding more goods, forcing the prices up, making it more expensive to live there. Well, they won't be there, so what? Price will be lower. Firms will be competing more for workers, wages will be higher, but there's no workers who are losing their jobs, because why? You're not letting them in. That would be a more macro effective way of dealing with it. It was great talking with you guys. Thank you very much.